So because of the ban list, a few decks have changed and now have weaknesses they didn't really have before. This essentially means that some older cards that used to not really be too good are now potentially good right now. And I'd like to start with a classic, which happens to be Regki. Obviously, this card's really bad when your opponent goes for like lingering threats or monsters that are completely immune to destruction. And you know, looking back at the last format, we kinda had that issue because both Kashtira and Despia were completely immune to Regki. The Kashtira deck could lock you out of 5 zones with Shangri-La and Diablosis, and if you Regki'd your opponent's board, the Shangri-La survived by detaching material and your zones were still locked. But of course, zone locking is no longer the main gimmick they can dish out because Diablosis is now banned, so things are completely different now. The deck is completely incapable of summoning like negates with their engine unless they're playing like a lot of really bad cards or their normal summoning hand traps to go into Baron, so if you can resolve a Regeki against them, they're really screwed. And even if they can protect their Shangri-La, it doesn't change anything because they're going to have a monster that can't even interrupt you and you still have like 3 zones to play with. In other words, Regeki is perfect against Kashtira regardless of the kind of board they're trying to achieve. Whether they play around Nibiru by summoning only like an Arise Hard Pass and 4 summons, or they actually go into a big board, Regeki always kind of beats everything they do. But do take note that if they're really skillful at the game, draw full combo, and Pot of Prosperity after that to banish the Infinite Track Goliath and then attach it with a Rise Art, their Rise Art will be immune to Regeki. And I'd say against Despia, Regeki is at least much better than it used to be last format. That deck used to consistently give you the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, and obviously there's nothing to Regeki because the main threat has been given to you and they kind of control no real big monster on the board. And again, Gimmick Puppet Nightmare is a lingering effect, not like a continuous thing, so even if you're trying to destroy yourself with Dark Hole, it doesn't change anything. It's not like Raw's Disciple or Ido. With that being said, since the Despia deck now has to rely on cards like Albion the Sanctifier Dragon to summon back threats from the graveyard, they might start losing to Regeki finally. I'm saying that because Albion requires a light spellcaster to be summoned, so people might just ditch the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare and play Jowgen instead. And Jowgen is a light spellcaster, so it fits perfectly here. And also, if they don't have Branded Opening in the graveyard, Regeki can also take care of their fusion monsters, which is really nice. And by the way, the reason why I'm not talking about hand traps at the moment is because, first of all, I'm gonna make a full video on them, but also because Trap Brigade Mercurior can negate them. But then again, spell cards like Regeki or even Foolish Return can be really nasty against Despia. If people are now choosing to go for Jowgen, then they start losing to Regeki, and if people go with Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, then they can't really combo off with only one card anymore. Now, if we're talking about really spicy going first decks against both Despia and Kashtira, how about Grave of the Super Ancient Organism? It's a pretty one-sided floodgate in case you're not playing high-level monsters because it shuts down every level 6 or higher special summon monster from being able to activate their effects on the field or even declare an attack. It goes without saying, but this card is checkmate against Despia because their engine cannot deal with this card, and it's not like they play any Link or Xyz monsters. The Kashtira deck can kind of out it if they can go into a rank 7 play, but if you can stop that, then they lose. Now, the next deck is really interesting, but only really works for plant decks, Super Heavy Samurai, or maybe Naturia. So if you're capable of playing Theron King Regulus in your deck, and you can also summon Naturia Rose Whip, you got yourself a really nasty soft lock for your opponent. So essentially, Naturia Rose Whip limits the amount of spells and trap cards your opponent can activate to only 1 per turn, and Regulus doesn't negate the activation, but rather the effect instead. So in other words, your opponent can only activate 1 spell card, you negate it with Regulus, your opponent can't do anything after because your opponent successfully activated a card even if it did nothing, and the only thing your opponent can do is activate monster effects. It definitely needs commitment and might not necessarily be the most viable option, but it's a cool idea nonetheless. Now, if you believe you will be playing against a lot of Sky Striker this format, do not hesitate to side in Share the Ride. It's basically a maxi for every single time your opponent searches a card from deck to hand, but also recycles back a card from graveyard to hand. And since it is not a hand shop, it's not as unfair as maxi, obviously, but it's still really good against slow-paced decks. If your opponent takes the maxi challenge under Share the Ride and you can draw hand traps, you might even survive an OTK and win next turn. There's a really good reason why this card was nasty back in the 2019 TOS format. Now, the final card I want to cover here is Deck Lockdown. And I'm in a pretty good position to criticize it because I sided 3 copies of that card in my Mathmech deck in YCS Philadelphia. And I can guarantee you 2 things with this card. Number 1, it is devastating against your opponent because it shuts down so many plays. And number 2, it shuts down so many plays, including your own, so it might actually hurt you if anything. Deck Lockdown is a far more strict version than Mistake because it also prevents both players from special summoning monsters from the deck. That means even Labyrinth cannot do anything as this card shuts down their Welcome and Big Welcome Labyrinth trap cards. and it is ridiculously strong against Kashtira and honestly any deck I can really think of. And this is exactly why this card is so good, because I can't really think of many decks that do not even suffer from playing this card. I guess Sky Striker can play this card relatively well because if they're getting tired of this card after one turn, they can shut it off with Sky Striker Area 0 or multi-roll, but it might not necessarily be optimal because that would mean that they missed out on their first search with Shizuku. Look, if your deck does not necessarily have to search or special summon anything from the deck, you have to play this card in your deck, it's broken. But with that being said, that's all I had to say for this video. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts about, all the decks that I just explained in this video, and if you think you have any more interesting decks that you can share with us in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.